recommendations for stakeholders, both in the policy world, the academic world, as well as for the Muslim community. And ISB over the past 10 years has been tackling some of these questions that impact Muslims. And each year we come back to ISNA to bring some of our scholars to discuss these issues. And so this particular panel, we've also done it on the issue of Islamophobia. And as we all know, Islamophobia is a topic which has been gaining more and more attention, one that directly impacts the community at all levels, whether it's discrimination or difficulty with building mosques, or whether it's actual hate crimes and even killing of Muslims just because of their faith. And it also then, of course, ties in with the broader debate that's taking place about the role of Muslims in America. And so, while there are many advocacy groups and organizations on the front line trying to address these issues, what ISQ is concerned about and attempts to do is to step back and try to analyze it from an academic standpoint as well as from a policy standpoint, and then provide analysis and recommendations. And today, we have gathered some of the leading scholars and individuals that have been contributing to this national debate that's taking place. And of the 5 individuals on the panel, 4 of them are ISPU scholars. And you will hear from them as academics, as lawyers, and as frontline advocates in this process. And so, I won't say much more other than we hope to get your feedback at the end of this process about what you thought of this panel and how we can improve it. There's information about ISPU on the back table, which we hope you also fill out the survey about the organization as well. I'll hand off the mic to the moderator today, Erik Love, who's an assistant professor at Dickinson College and also a recent fellow at ISPU writing about these issues of civil liberties and Islamophobia in America. And with that, I thank you for coming.
Hi folks, sorry for the thunderous noise of the microphone. We have just one microphone here, and I want to thank you for joining us on this panel. I'm honored and excited to be able to moderate this panel with folks that are at the leading edge of studying what we already know is such an important and difficult issue facing the American Muslim community, the issue of Islamophobia. And I want to thank ISNA for yet another great convention. I want to thank ISPU for pulling this together, particularly Farid and Siwar for pulling this great panel together. Islamophobia is a problem that's existed for decades. It's a problem that unfortunately has gotten demonstrably worse in recent years. There are headlines every day about American Muslims facing discrimination at work, in public places. The police have unfairly targeted Muslim communities for scrutiny. Mosques have been torched. It's sad, and it's not supposed to happen here in the United States. What can be done about this? What can we do? What are some ways that we can harness the energy of the people in this room, the people at this conference, to confront Islamophobia? We've got a great panel here to discuss and start that conversation. We want to hear from you as well. We're going to do this panel a little bit differently perhaps than some others. Rather than having each panelist speak for 15 or 20 minutes, we're just going to have a conversation. And that's something that we want you to participate in as well. My name is Erik Love. As Farid said, I'm a professor of sociology at Dickinson College, which is in Pennsylvania. And let's get started. This panel is really outstanding. I'm honored to be sitting up here with Asma Uddin, who is a legal fellow at ISPU and the founder and editor-in-chief of altmuslima.com. She's also legal counsel at the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty. She's a frequent contributor to national media, including the Washington Post and the Huffington Post. Engy Abdelkader is a legal fellow with the ISPU and an award-winning attorney, scholar, and Master of Laws candidate at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She currently serves as vice president of Karama, Muslim Women Lawyers for Human Rights. You may have seen her latest contribution on the Huffington Post, published just yesterday, about American Muslims in the arts. Ihsan Bagby, also an ISPU fellow and associate professor in the Department of Islamic Studies at the University of Kentucky. His research has focused on Muslims in America. He published the results of the first comprehensive study of mosques in America, entitled The Mosque in America, A National Portrait, and he's one of only 2 non-lawyers on the panel along with me. So thank you for being here. All right. Stephen Downs graduated from Cornell Law School in 1969. He served 2 years in the Peace Corps in India, formerly the chief attorney for the New York State Commission on Judicial Conduct. Today, Downs serves as the interim executive director of the National Coalition to Protect Civil Liberties. He's a founding member of the Muslim Solidarity Committee, Protect Salam, and other prominent organizations that help advocate and care for defendants, especially those accused of terrorist-related crimes, those who face the prospect of preemptive prosecution. It's a great panel. Let's get started. Engy, could you tell us a little bit about some of the recent issues that have impacted the American Muslim community?
Good morning. I want to thank ISPU as well as Islam for having me here with you today. The purpose of this panel is to determine what we can do as American citizens to combat the intensifying trend of Islamophobia in our country. And in order to decide how to best affect change, positive change in our country, we need to be aware of what the issues are that are confronting us specifically. And so what I'd like to do is just spend a few moments identifying some areas of recurring problematic behavior on both the national, state, local level. On a national level, one issue which we don't often discuss around the dinner table, but which is of significance, especially in the advocacy community in Washington, D.C. in particular, is that of biased law enforcement and military trainings. These are commonly referred to as Islamophobic trainings, and essentially what I'm referring to is that there is an area called countering violent extremism, and this is exactly what it sounds like. Law enforcement officials and military personnel are trained how to combat the terrorist initiative, both domestically and internationally. And so they have these quote-unquote experts come in and talk to agents and military personnel about Islam, American Muslims, and Muslims more generally. Unfortunately, some of the material that comes out is very biased in orientation. And so, for instance, with the FBI trainings, law enforcement trainings, there were a series of media articles which revealed that FBI personnel were being trained that the more religious a Muslim becomes, the more likely they are to become a terrorist. That there is a direct correlation between an individual who attends prayer at mosques and their likelihood to be a sympathizer with terrorism. Of course, these trainings are not just limited to the FBI. They also occur within the Department of Homeland Security. They occur within military colleges as well. Why should this be disconcerting to us as citizens? Because when agents are trained in such biased techniques, these are implemented in our communities, and I'll show you how. If an agent is trained that there's a correlation, that there's a relationship between the frequency with which an American Muslim goes to the mosque and their likelihood to sympathize with terrorist efforts, then it should come as no surprise that when you're entering the United States at an international airport or crossing over at an international border, let's say from Canada to the United States, because you're returning from a religious convention that was just occurred in Canada, that you're stopped and asked by an agent, do you go to the mosque? How often do you go to the mosque? Do you pray your morning prayer at the mosque? The reason they're asking you these questions is because they were taught at these biased law enforcement trainings that there is a relationship between the frequency with which you're praying at the mosque and the likelihood that you may be affiliated with some terrorist organization or sympathize with terrorist efforts. Of course, this is completely wrong. The First Amendment of the Constitution protects us from government activity that impinges on our religious freedoms. We are free to go to the mosque and worship without being subject to such interrogations about our religious activities, particularly where they're not impinging on the rights or freedoms of other individuals. Similarly, these bias trainings also occur on the state level as well. And so then we see activities such as the NYPD surveillance issue, right? Which I'm sure most of us in this room have heard about. The fact that for over 6 years now, the NYPD has been profiling the American Muslim community, has been mapping ethnic and religious communities in the New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut areas. The problem with their activities is that it's not based on any evidence of criminal wrongdoing. It is based rather on whether or not a person speaks Bengali or Urdu. It is based on whether or not they go to certain mosques. It is based on whether or not they are affiliated with a Muslim student association on campus, not on any credible leads of criminal wrongdoing, not on any evidence that this person or organization is affiliated with a terrorist or violent cause. And that's a problem. It's a problem because it runs counter to some basic ideals which we hold fundamental here in the United States. It's also a problem because there is some real political and social implications. Even if you, as an individual, are not spied upon by the NYPD, the people around you are receiving a nefarious message from their activities. When the media reports that NYPD is surveillancing mosques in the tri-state area, that they're surveillancing students who are associated with the MSAs at their universities, the message that your neighbors, that your coworkers, that other people who are attending university and schools receive is that this is a suspicious community, that mosques are bastions of terroristic activity, that there are places that we should be concerned about, that Muslims at our universities are people that we should not trust, that perhaps my Muslim coworker, although seemingly innocuous to me, is actually somehow plotting to hurt me or my country, and I shouldn't trust them. And so the result is a social and political stigmatization. And obviously, from our perspective as community members, this is offensive, although perhaps not surprising to many people, because maybe a lot of us expected that our activities are being spied upon. But there's a lawsuit that was instituted by Muslim Advocates, which is an advocacy group consisting of American lawyers, to challenge NYPD initiatives. And most recently, in a deposition, which is a legal proceeding, which allows parties to be asked questions for the purpose of gathering evidence in connection with a lawsuit. The assistant chief of the NYPD admitted that in the 6 years that they have been surveillancing Muslims in the tri-state area, that not once did it open an investigation into terrorist activity. And not once did they get a lead on terrorist activity. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the NYPD is engaged in a tremendous waste of scarce resources, which is what we've been saying from the beginning. It's not only that these activities impinge on our civil rights and civil liberties. It is the fact that as Americans and as taxpayers, we should be concerned with the way that our state and federal government are spending resources. And this is not the way to do it. I'm confident that pretty much everybody in this room doesn't want to see another terrorist attack happen in our country, or for that matter, anywhere in the world. For the most part, Muslims, as we know, are peace-loving people. And we also know that in addition to being the targets of such hate and violence by perhaps co-religionists, that we also suffer a backlash because of such attacks. So none of us want to see another terrorist attack occur on U.S. soil. And therefore, personally speaking, I know that I'm all for effective government measures, whether on the federal, state, or local level, that counter violent extremism, that counter terrorists from attacking us again. However, they need to be effective techniques. It's not about painting the entire Muslim, Arab American, South Asian communities with a broad brush. It's about determining, based on credible evidence, if there is an individual who's engaged in criminal wrongdoing, that is acting on something nefarious that should do harm to other people. That is the most effective way to implement law enforcement techniques. As I mentioned, in addition to the profiling occurring at our airports and profiling occurring by state agencies such as the NYPD, law enforcement agencies, there's an effect on private actors, meaning individuals that live among us. There's increased employment discrimination. According to statistics in 2009, and I believe there may be more recent statistics, but according to the statistics of the EEOC, which is the government agency that collects information about the number of employment discrimination claims filed by American citizens, by Americans in the United States. In 2009, American Muslims, which constitute 1 to 2% of the total American population, 1 to 2% of the total American population, religious discrimination claims are actually 25% of all religious discrimination claims that the U.S. government receives. What's disconcerting about this, besides that disturbing number, is the fact that there's so many employment discrimination claims that go unreported. Anecdotally, I know of professors, individuals in academia. I know of educated women who don't even wear hijab, who are engineers and other professional fields that tell me of incidents that occur in their workplace that constitute hostile work environments, that they would have legitimate claims to employment discrimination, but they never file an employment discrimination claim because they fear retaliation. They fear retaliation in the employment context. They fear that they will be out of a job, especially in this bad economy, and they don't want to risk that. And sometimes it's just fear, period. They're scared, and they'd rather deal with whatever it is that's happening in their employment context than to stand up for their own rights. And as I said, we often assume that the victims of such discrimination are women who wear hijab, but that's not necessarily the case. It's not just women who wear hijab. It's just the fact that you're Muslim. It's the fact that you look different. It's the fact that you may have darker skin than other individuals, and that makes you a target for discrimination. And I think that we need to find within ourselves collectively more courage to take a stand, because not only are we sending a message to the individuals who are discriminating against us that we will tolerate this kind of behavior and that we will not do anything about it, but we're also setting an example for our children. And that brings me to the issue of school bullying. In my view, I think there's a silent epidemic of school bullying occurring within the public school system that we have not even glimpsed as a community. I often lecture to young people. I lectured to a group of young people in New York several months ago. They reached an age from about 15 to 23, and I was appalled at the level of discrimination that they are confronting in their schools. And what was more disconcerting to me was their reaction to this discrimination, which was nothing. They did not tell their parents that they were facing this discrimination and bullying in school. They did not tell their teachers about the discrimination that they were facing in school. They did not advise their principal. And when I asked them why they did not, their response was resoundingly, because nothing will happen. That is a problem. That is a problem. It is a problem on two fronts. It's a problem for our children, because I worry about the adults that they are going to become in 5 to 10 years, and the internal lessons that they are learning from the fact that you become a victim of discrimination and abuse, because that's what's occurring here, it's abuse, and that you do nothing in response to it. And it's also a problem for the perpetrators of this abuse, for the children who are doing the bullying, because they will become the perpetrators of discrimination in the employment context tomorrow. And so for those of us whose first response to hearing about bias-based bullying against children, if we have this internal response, which is, well, thank God, I don't have to deal with that because my kids are in Islamic school, so alhamdulillah, they don't have to deal with that issue. Number one, we should really alter our viewpoint to understand that these children are all of our children. It's not someone else's children. They belong to all of us. Number two, realize that your child, unless you're planning on immigrating from this country, will at some point enter the real world. They will not always be in a sheltered environment where they're only surrounded by other Muslims who do not target and bully them because of their religious beliefs. They will at some point, sooner or later, have to interact with other individuals. And these other individuals may come from environments and from backgrounds where they have learned that it's perfectly acceptable and okay to bully Muslims, because no one ever stopped them from doing so. This occurs in schools, it occurs in employment context. And so I think that we need to take a proactive step. You may not think that your children or your niece or nephew or your cousin is being subjected to bullying, but I encourage you to sit down and talk to them about the subject, because you may be surprised to find out that they have actually been bullied, or that they know of other children who have been bullied, and they may open up to you and tell you that. You need to make sure that they feel comfortable coming to you and telling you about what's going on in school, that they're not going to disappoint you, that they're not going to hurt your feelings, that you're not going to brush them aside and disregard the complaints that they have, whether it's abuse by a teacher or abuse by other children. You need to make sure that open lines of communication exist within that family structure. Okay, I'm over time, so.
Thank you, Engy, and we will be coming back to Engy as the conversation continues. One thing I want to point out, and Engy brought up a number of extremely important issues, factors in Islamophobia. Many of them center on this misconception that the more religious you are, the more likely you are to do something wrong. The more Muslim, the more religious you are, if you're a Muslim specifically, then the more likely you are to, for example, be radicalized. This is a misconception that lies at the center of so much of Islamophobia, and we don't need to simply assert that it's not true. We know it's not true. There's research showing that it's not true by people who study counterterrorism. So experts who study counterterrorism have seen that this is not the case, that it's actually the more pious you are as a Muslim, the less likely you are to be involved in terrorism. That's a point that, unfortunately, it seems folks in law enforcement haven't heard yet. If you'd like to read more about that, there's excellent research out of the Triangle Center in North Carolina. A sociologist by the name of Charles Kurzman. His book is The Missing Martyrs, about why people who are Muslim, more pious, are less likely to be involved in terrorism.
And I think in relation to that, the reason for that is because of the nature of our Constitution, the nature of the way things work in our legal system. And I thought it would be helpful if I could just kind of give you guys an overview of how our Constitution works, because I think that's something that I've noticed a lot of Muslims are not very educated on. And the American Constitution, I mean, as Erik mentioned, I'm a legal counsel at the Bagby Fund for Religious Liberty. We are a nonprofit law firm that deals with only one issue, and that is religious freedom. And that is under the First Amendment religion clauses and under the federal statutes that work to implement our constitutional principles. And one thing I've noticed is that, especially because I work internationally as well, I've done religious freedom work in Egypt and in Pakistan and Indonesia, and I can tell you that nowhere else in this world, even in Europe, comes anywhere near the level of protection that the American Constitution provides for religious freedom. And that, from my observations of the Muslim experience in America, especially as compared to Muslims abroad, this is a place where you can really express your religion in fullest and really come to it in a very true way, because the ability to question without government interference. And so the way this works is that our First Amendment has these two clauses. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So there's the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. And the Establishment Clause is there to say that no one religion can be favored or disfavored. We're going to treat religion all the same, and we're going to make sure that one never takes over the other, because we don't want one religion to control the way things happen in this country. And the free, but then so many people interpret that as a way of kind of limiting religion. But in fact, it gives space for flourishing of religion as well, because it says that you can't suppress one or the other. And the Free Exercise Clause really sort of undergirds that by saying that only in very certain limited circumstances can the government limit free exercise of religion. But otherwise, we're going to give really, really broad protection. Religious believers can participate in religious expression in the public square to the fullest extent possible, and the only limits are the compelling government interests that limit that supersedes that. And so in many cases, the one we've heard about is national security. It says that the government has the right to protect itself. But there is a very sort of developed jurisprudence that says that even with those exceptions, it has to be done in a very narrowly tailored way. You can't use it too broadly. You can't just say national security and then the government doesn't have to prove that this is the best way to protect national security. And so just to kind of get into some of the other principles under, so these two clauses work together, and there's always so much tension of the jurisprudence and very actually confused. But some of the overarching principles that come out of that is A, beliefs get absolute protection. The government cannot limit your beliefs in any way. It's the only thing that kind of gets into the realm of government regulation would be actions on the basis of religion. And I just said an example of that is when they have compelling interest. The both clauses protect minority and majority religions. So I think a lot of us tend to think of this as a way for Muslims and Hindus and other minorities to be protected, but it also protects Christians, of course. The idea is that it's for everyone, including dissenting voices within the majority. And so one of the things that Bagby does is that we do have a lot of Christian clients who are really, there's a whole culture war in this country going on between the secular and the religious, and sometimes just being a devout Christian can be really difficult in this country as well. And so we protect their right to freely express their religious beliefs. And one of the doctrines that's come out of the Free Exercise Clause and Establishment Clause, the idea of the religious question doctrine. This is where I'm going to segue back into the Sharia law. And the idea there is that judges have to stay out of religion. So you can regulate issues where there's religion, reference to Sharia principles as a clause in your contract, but in regulating that, judges cannot get into. So, what exactly, which version of Sharia is right, and what is Sharia really, what is the specific meaning of this? Let's get into the entire background, the way that this law was introduced. They can't get into that. They have to stay at the secular level. And the reason for that is this understanding that judges are just not competent when it comes to religion. And furthermore, especially when it comes to issues of protection of minority religions, we know that American judges will just not understand them. They're not the right people to go to when you're trying to figure out, the nitty-gritty of religious law. And so, American judges completely stay out of internal matters of religion and cannot get into religious issues. And so when you come to these anti-Sharia laws, of which there are dozens across more than half the states in this country, and typically the language, there's different ways they say it, and those who that mention Sharia on their face say something like the one in Oklahoma, which says, this measure amends the state constitution. It makes courts rely on federal and state law when deciding cases. It forbids courts from considering or using international law, and it forbids courts from considering or using Sharia law. A couple of issues there. One, I said earlier, the Establishment Clause says that the government cannot disfavor or favor one religion or the other. The second, you have a law that says, or a ballot initiative that mentions Sharia specifically. That's exactly what you're doing. You're pointing out, you're singling out Muslims, and you're completely leaving out of the equation all the other religions. And so now you create a special disfavor, facially, on the very face of the law, for Muslims. So this violates the principles of the Establishment Clause. The second issue, as I just mentioned under the religious question doctrine, is the fact that, hey, judges can't use Sharia anyway. So at the end of the day, this law doesn't really do anything except it's total redundancy. In the sense of never have courts use Sharia and never will they, because That's just the nature of a constitutional framework.
Thank you, Asma. And I think one thing that's important to understand about, we were discussing before the panel, how many states have seen anti-Sharia legislation or ballot
I think at this stage we're at 29 states.
29 states. This is an issue that appears only because of the significant financial support of conservative organizations and right-wing organizations that are very well funded. And they are pushing the issue that Sharia is dangerous, despite the fact that there is absolutely no reason to think that. And 29 states have seen ballot initiatives like the Constitutional Amendment in Oklahoma that Asma discussed. There are ways that we can fight back against this well-funded, dedicated group of people that are pushing Islamophobia. And I think that Professor Bagby's research discusses some ways that can happen with the involvement of political participation of Muslims, specifically the ways that the mosque can play a role in that. Could you talk about that?
I hear it. Kind of loud. I really want to focus on how do we respond to Islamophobia. My advocacy is that our masjids are really the best vehicle, or the most effective vehicle, or one of the most effective vehicles for responding. 2 points. Islamophobia is founded in and results in a negative view of Muslims. Arab American Institute just did a study published this, August. Gallup and Pew have done similar studies, which show basically the same result, that about 60% of Americans have either a negative view, unfavorable view of Muslims, or they're not sure. That's a high percentage. That's why these organizations that raise the red flag of this Muslim menace get a hearing, because there is such a negative view in the American public. Interesting that Arab American Institute also showed that the key association with a negative view of Islam, Muslims, or an unsure view, is the fact that they do not know an Arab or Muslim. They have not been exposed to Islam. So 2/3 of those Americans who know an Arab or a Muslim have a favorable view. And the sad reality is that over 70% of Americans do not know a Muslim. So there's a large percentage of Americans who do not know a Muslim. Or they say they're not sure whether they know a Muslim. In other words, strange name, not a white American, but I'm not sure who is he a Muslim or she is a Muslim or not. So one of the ways, in fact, the statistics seem to point to that the way to undermine Islamophobia is to increase the favorable view of the American public. And one of the ways to do that, if not maybe the main way, but one of the ways to do that, is for Muslims to be more visible in their communities, more visible in their cities. And one of the best vehicles for getting to mobilize Muslims, to get Muslims involved as individuals and as groups, is the masjid. We need to mobilize our masjids so that they might mobilize individual Muslims. And masjids are the central organization, the central institution of our community. That's just the reality. Pew showed that in their most recent 2011 study of Muslims, that 2/3 of all Muslims attend a mosque at least once a week. 2/3. And of course, our masjids are growing in great numbers. The masjid participation is growing. And just recently, down there, Mujahid and Gallup actually made this exact same point, the same conclusion, that masjids are so important as a strategy for how to change the image of Muslims in America. If masjids can be mobilized, that will allow individual Muslims and other organizations to be mobilized. Organizations can use the masjids as a platform for organizing activities. I'm not talking about masjids doing everything, but I am talking about Karama and other efforts that are being made to try to get Muslims to become more active, to be more vocal. What better platform to use to try to get that message in the ear of individual Muslims? The masjid. And masjids are open to it. In fact, Amani Jamal in Princeton, and again Dalia Mujahid, who works for Gallup, in their studies, they've shown that a person who attends a masjid at least once a week is twice as likely to be involved in American society and political activities. So in fact, the more a Muslim attends a masjid, the more likely it is that they are open, willing, and possibly active in participating, becoming involved, speaking out. So our masjids need to be a focus, and I'm talking loud enough, hopefully, that ISNA can hear, the ISNA leadership can hear, and other organizations can hear, that they need to not ignore masjids, but in fact make masjids an agenda item. And masjids, through my research, are evolving, showing much more positive attitudes. 90% of masjid leaders agree that Muslims should be involved in the political arena here in America, should be involved in American society. So that debate, at least among masjid leadership, and that debate largely in the American community, is over. It's accepted that we should become involved. By the way, one of the clear changes and evolution from 2000, when I asked the same question, is among those masjid leaders that identify themselves as following one particular madhab. In 2000, the majority of them agreed, but I gave them two choices: somewhat agree, strongly agree. Most of them somewhat agree. Now, in 2011, I asked the same question. The vast majority of them strongly agree. So even people who, in our own sense, and maybe stereotype, think of kind of madhabi type people being a lot more internally focused, and maybe they are, but still there is a broad agreement in the Muslim community, all masjids, that we really should be involved. Only Salafi masjid leaders do not agree. In fact, they're 100% that Muslims should not become involved. But there are a very, very, very small percentage of masjids here in America. And masjids are more involved in the type of activities that are necessary for us to change that public image. 80% of masjids are involved in some interfaith activity. We asked them, were they involved in an interfaith activity in the past 12 months? 80%. impacted, they have done something. How much? How effective? What's the quality of that involvement is an open question. And it's really my urging of the people here that they push their masjids to become even more involved and even more effective. Again, we asked how many masjids had an open house in the past 12 months. Again, I was actually very surprised, pleasantly surprised to see that 63% of all masjids had an open house in the past 12 months. Again, a very good sign that their mindset is ready. Again, another surprising result of our study of masjids last year was that 45%, almost half of all masjids, have done some type of health program, health clinic, health fair, health education program, and many of these activities are aimed at their general community. Again, showing that masjid leadership overall has a good understanding of what masjid should be about, which is not simply, the salah and ibadat, which of course is the foundation, but masjid should be about a lot more. So my simple point is that our masjids here in America are not only primed to be a central institution, but also that their mindset is there. And it's a matter of getting people to push their masjids and inside, and also organizations outside, like Ihsan, Karama, and other organizations, to pull masjids out even more to become involved in these issues. Assalamu alaikum.
I think, as Professor Bagby is describing, I imagine it's very easy for many folks at masjids around the country to feel not only concerned, but maybe isolated. As someone who studies Islamophobia, I get discouraged all the time because there's just so much, there's headlines all the time about the powerful interests that are aligned with the Islamophobic forces. But when people get involved, they really do make a huge difference. For example, a story that I think is so important, just from the last couple of months, the mosque in Joplin, Missouri, many of you will have heard, suffered from not one but 2 arson attacks. And it was, sadly, in a huge injustice, destroyed. Within a couple of weeks, that mosque has raised nearly $500,000 to rebuild. They set the goal of raising $250,000 in the local community, and they doubled that goal, nearly $500,000 raised in Joplin, Missouri. When people get involved, they really can make a difference, and there are ways to respond. And finding allies in the general American community is very possible. It's happening all the time. And some of the work that Steve Downs is doing, he's really on the front line with his organizations, dealing with the challenges that Muslim Americans face in the legal system. And Steve, why don't you tell us a bit about this issue, the issue of preemptive prosecution, and ways that you and your organizations are working to stop it?
Sure. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the National Executive Director of the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms, and we're a coalition of 20 civil rights and Muslim organizations that set ourselves up to focus on 3 particular problems that we thought were of unusual concern: profiling, preemptive prosecution, and prisoner abuse in prison systems. Profiling, you probably have a pretty good idea of it. I'm not going to go into it now. And prisoner abuse is also something you can probably get a pretty good idea of, although I'd like to say more about it. But I want to talk now about preemptive prosecution, because this is something that is not well understood, and unfortunately has a tremendous impact because it allows the government to portray the Muslim community as violent and terrorism, where in fact it isn't. But this is a way that the government is able to manipulate the dialogue that goes on in America today. And this is essentially what happened. After 9/11, the FBI was charged with preventing the next terrorist attack. And in order to do that, they would have to be able to predict who the next terrorist would be. How do you do that? And one of the techniques, one of the main techniques the FBI used was to focus on ideology. And I want you to emphasize that word ideology because I'm going to be referring to it in a Muslim context. But it is not necessary that the government use the ideological framework as Muslim. They can use it for any ideology they don't like. But anyway, they focused on the idea of ideology as a way to predict criminal behavior. If you are too ideological, you may act on that ideology and end up doing some sort of a crime. And for example, in the Muslim context, if you pray too often, or if you use particular words like jihad and paradise together, these kind of ideas could suggest somewhere down the road, maybe you might act on it. And so the idea of preemptive prosecution is to preempt that from happening by locking people up on pretextual manufactured charges so that they won't be able to actually commit a real crime. This, of course, is not advertised by the government, but this is what our research has shown. And I have over here a wall that I bring around everywhere I go. It's victims of preemptive prosecution. These are about 150 cases that we've been following of people. I could actually put up 3 or 4 more similar walls like that because we have over 800 cases that we're following. But these are the most famous, and I have some more cases over here that we're following. Preemptive prosecution, the idea of preventing crime, is not an unusual or a new idea. The Soviet Union, for example, tried it at one point. I think the old joke in the Soviet Union was that there were no criminals in their jails, there was only political prisoners. Because what they were doing was locking up people before they could commit a crime based on whether they were distanced from the official line. And you remember how we all mocked that and said how unjust this is. This is just pure injustice, that you lock somebody up before they commit a crime. And without any discussion, without any hint of irony, the U.S. has basically adopted that, at least in counterterrorism cases. We've also had a very bad experience in the past with this in COINTELPRO. I don't remember how many people here know or have heard of COINTELPRO, but back in the 60s, this was the FBI's intent to lock up dissidents and people that they did not like from an ideological point of view. They particularly went after war resistors, war protesters, and the African American community, the Black Panthers. And as part of COINTELPRO, they actually sanctioned the killing, the targeting, assassination of leaders they wanted to get out of the way. Fred Hampton, over there on the wall. They framed people, they framed them for murder that they knew they had committed, and so on. Eventually, the church committee, Frank Church, in the 70s, set up a panel and said, in a democracy, it is completely unacceptable that the government go to war against its own citizens. It cannot lie, it cannot cheat, it cannot manufacture cases against innocent people. This is completely out of bounds no matter how much ideologically you disagree with it. And now, after 9/11, what has essentially happened is that COINTELPRO has come back again on steroids, because now their ability to listen to us has been greatly enhanced. Their ability to store information in computers is greatly enhanced. And I will tell you that there's a dossier on every one of us. Every one of us is found somewhere in their computers. They can locate us, they can find out who we meet with, who we talk to, and so on. That's just what the government is doing now. I just want to quickly describe how preemptive prosecution works. It has actually 3 aspects to it. On the one hand, once they identify people that they want to target, and I just want to mention that one of the ways they do that is they go into the mosques and they have informants, and they have people go around and talk to people in mosques and find out what's going on, find out if you use the word jihad within 2 words of paradise. And then they will say, brother, tell me about it. How much do you want to go to paradise? How much are you willing to do? And see if they can talk them into something that will amount to an act of crime. But one of the things that they have done is they passed material support for terrorism laws. And these laws are very, are difficult because they criminalize behavior that nobody considers criminal. It makes it absolutely illegal for anyone to have contact with people associated with designated terrorist organizations. And there are organizations all over the world that have been designated as terrorist organizations, including some that are actually functioning as governments in different parts of the world. And if you happen to come from that part of the world, it is very difficult not to have some contact with them. And so, for example, they've taken some of our people down for charitable activities. The Holy Land Foundation, for example, is building schools and hospitals in Palestine. And the directors who were sent away, Ihsan Bagby was sent away for 86 years because although the government conceded that none of the money had gone to any terrorist organization, by building the schools and hospitals in Palestine, where there was a designated terrorist, Hamas was the governing body in the particular area, it enhanced the prestige of Hamas. And so that was material support for terrorism. They've gone after people for giving social hospitality, for engaging in peacemaking, for engaging in free speech. They've gone after environmentalists, animal rights people, and of course people who were excessively Islamic. All of this is completely unfair. It essentially criminalizes behavior that should not be criminal. And the other thing that they do is they send in agent provocateurs to try to talk you into committing some sort of a crime or getting too involved. And perhaps the Newburgh 4 case is a good example of 4 young, impoverished, and in some cases mentally challenged young men who were got up a plot by an FBI agent who offered them $250,000 if they would bomb a synagogue. Now, you can get an arsonist for a lot less than $250,000 to bomb a building. But they didn't want an arsonist. They wanted somebody that they could credibly claim was Islamic, so that they could say this was a terrorist. These are the games the FBI plays. And they want these people to be portrayed as terrorists, so that they could smear the entire Muslim community. And this is the reality of what we have to face, that we are faced with a government that is targeting these people because it helps them in other parts of their program. Excuse me. And one other aspect of this is the prison abuse. This occurs when you put people in solitary confinement. And under the conventions, to be put in solitary confinement for more than 30 days is prohibited because it is so mentally debilitating. People very quickly start to lose their sanity. They lose real hold on reality. They find it very difficult even to articulate words or sentences. And it's very painful. You become panic-stricken very often. You really lose the sense of who you are. And if it goes on for any length of time, it can become permanent. What the government has started to do is when you're accused of a terroristic crime, they will put you into solitary confinement immediately under some pretext and keep you there for years. And until you become so debilitated, you cannot cooperate in your defense. You can't even testify on your own behalf. And then they put you in a special Muslim prison in the middle of the United States, the Communication Management Unit, which is mostly Muslim. And again, these are kind of ideological prisons. They are put there for people who they do not want to be heard. They want to make sure that under no circumstances does this ideology, whatever ideology it is, get out. So these are 3 aspects of the kinds of cases that we are handling. And I just wanted to say that if you want to know more about it, the names of these people are on the NCPCF website, or you could go to the Project Salam website, and I have an article on there called Victims of America's Dirty Wars, which will tell you a lot more about each one of those cases, just if you're interested in the philosophy of what I've talked about, or the particular cases.
Thank you, Steve. Alhamdulillah, we have a wonderful and very large audience here, and it looks like they're brimming with ideas. and I want to hear all of them. We're going to move the microphone back to a stand here. If you please come to the microphone if you have a question or a comment. I ask that you keep your question or comment very brief. We have just a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we have time to hear from as many people as possible. I want to start by asking, Engy, you mentioned the work of an organization that I'm familiar with, Muslim Advocates. For example, I happen to know Muslim Advocates has worked with the Department of Justice directly. In fact, Eric Holder spoke to the Muslim Advocates banquet last year about the issues that Steve was talking about, for example. Could you just describe some of the ways that that Muslims are involved? You know, we've heard about all these problems here, but it's not as though nothing's happening to try to push back against this, to confront the discrimination. Talk a little bit about what you know about what's happening.
So I did mention Muslim Advocates in terms of the lawsuit that they filed challenging the surveillance, the constitutionality of the surveillance by NYPD. There are many organizations that are doing good work on various issues trying to counter the tide of Islamophobia in this country. I actually serve on the board of one of them, Karama, Muslim Women Lawyers for Human Rights, which is also based here in Washington, D.C. And as Vice President of Karama, I represent the organization every few months at meetings, which occur at the Department of Justice headquarters here in D.C. It's a select invitation-only meeting where there are about representatives of 6 organizations, including MPAC, ABC, AAI, Muslim Advocates, the Sikh Coalition, and SALT. Give or take one or two. And essentially around the room, in addition to these advocates that are representing the American Muslim, Arab American, and South Asian communities, there are representatives from almost every single federal agency in the room, including at times the CIA, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security. Everyone is in that room. It's a very crowded room. And the point of these meetings is to actually bring to the fore various issues and questions that we have related to civil rights infractions that are occurring on the ground. And so regularly we are discussing issues like the NYPD surveillance issue. We are discussing issues such as Islamophobic trainings that are occurring within the federal environment. And actually, one of the victories that we had, because it's a mixed bag in terms of how those meetings go, we're not always so happy when we're walking out, but sometimes we do feel that there is some incremental change that's occurring as a result of our advocacy work. And so, for instance, on the subject of Islamophobic trainings, as a result of our consistent advocacy on that issue, the Department of Justice implemented protocols that have to be used by every government agency when they are conducting a training on countering violent extremism. So essentially when they are training their agents, military personnel, etc., on Islam and Muslims, either here or abroad, there are certain protocols, there are certain guidelines that they need to follow. So for instance, they need to make sure that the trainings conform with the First Amendment of the Constitution, which is respecting freedom of religion. And so we actually spoke with Deputy Attorney General James Cole, on that issue, and we've also spoken with DHS Secretary Napolitano just recently on the issue of Islamophobic trainings. And so, the good work of these groups should be highlighted and recognized, and we should support them because they're really doing a thankless job representing the interests of American Muslim communities at a time when it's not necessarily very easy to do so. In addition, one other point I do want to make as well, and that I'd like to encourage those in our community to also work for the government. I know oftentimes we paint the government as being the bad guy. They are persecuting, if not prosecuting, members of our community, sometimes in a way that we find offensive. However, oftentimes we forget about the American Muslims, the South Asians, and the Arab Americans who are actually working within these government agencies for our interests. And I personally know men and women within the Department of Homeland Security, within the Department of Justice, within other areas of the federal, state government, which work to protect our civil rights and civil liberties. And to give you an example, I mentioned during my presentation about the increasing number of employment discrimination claims being filed by American Muslims. One case which you may have heard about, it garnered a lot of media attention, involved an American Muslim teacher who wanted to take several weeks off from school to perform the religious pilgrimage, the Hajj, right? And as a result, the school denied her request for a religious accommodation to perform what she believed was a religious duty, and I believe she was eventually terminated. The Department of Justice actually took on her case, and the case eventually settled after some discovery. I believe it settled for approximately $65,000, and I believe that teacher was reinstated to that school. But what you may not know is that the woman who litigated that case and actually achieved that settlement is an American Muslim lawyer who wears hijab. And so in that press release by the Department of Justice that you may have read about the victory for that American Muslim teacher, you didn't know that the person who was behind it was an American Muslim government employee. And so I think that we can't approach things as being completely black and white. Obviously, I'm not encouraging individuals to take positions where it may disturb their moral compass and they'll be doing things that they don't feel comfortable with as an American citizen, as a Muslim, etc. But do realize that there are many opportunities for us to affect positive change and to help our community, not just by working for Muslim advocates or MPAC or CARE or these other organizations, but also working within the government of our country, because we are American citizens, we are Americans, so there's no shame in working for the government. It can be a good thing as well.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Let's hear from, yes, please, sister. Briefly, please, we don't have...
No, I hope I'm allowed to make a comment.
Yes.
Thank you so much for putting up with this panel, and we really enjoyed that. I believe that, yes, masajids do need to take an active role, but individually, it is our responsibility to get involved. I come from Toledo, Ohio, and I think we are in the forefront of that. In Toledo, Ohio, what we have done is not only are we actively involved with our neighbors, but we're actively involved with the interfaith communities. We are actively engaged at the school levels. My child goes to a private school, was bullied by a child, but we didn't take it negatively. Parents need to get involved with the TPAs. Parents and students need to get involved with the student bodies. And we need to open up not only our masajid, but our homes and also the school classrooms. The classrooms where you should be sending in at the fastathon or at the beginning of the Ramadan some gifts, even at Christmas gifts, even at Eid gifts. So the children start to ask questions, teachers start to ask questions. So we need to involve the school levels at that. Coaches, sports. Yes, masajids can do that. In our masajids, we have fastathons where we invite the neighbors. We also have festivals. We open up the mosque and show them our different ethnic backgrounds, and we invite them to come and enjoy the food with us, and in doing so, give them a glimpse of what really Islam is, taking them for tours and asking the questions. Interfaith, get involved. We're involved in Toledo to become a city of compassion, which you have heard Kevin Armstrong. I would advise all of you to go and attend her forum today to learn more about it, take it back to your cities, and hopefully get involved in turning your cities into a compassionate city. Thank you.
Thank you, sister. Yes. Toledo, Ohio, some amazing work happening there. Professor Bagby, is this unique to Toledo, or are there other places where something similar is happening as well?
No, there are many, many masjids and Muslim communities that are involved. I'm very encouraged about the evolution of masjids, the mentality of masjid participants. My only point about masjids is that masjids can serve as a center for getting that message out to everybody. Jummah khutbahs, meetings, it's a place where organizations can go to get their message out, where organizations can go to get mobilized to respond to some of the arrests that have been made. The reality is that the Muslim voice and its presence is still weak in this country. How do we get individual Muslims involved? How do we grow our voice and masjids? And that platform that masjids provide is just one means.
My name is Mohammed Taq, I live in Maryland. What I want to understand is the Islamophobes, what their game plan is, what they're really targeting. I'm sure anti-Sharia is just one of the steps. What are they going to do after that, and what they're really trying to achieve, and what their target is? What their game plan is?
Really good question. What is the goal of the Islamophobes, right? And perhaps who would like to speak? Can you say a few words about that?
I think for most Islamophobes, the biggest thing that they can get out of this is fear. As long as people are afraid of something, if it's Sharia law, if it's Muslim takeover, if it's almost anything, people can be manipulated to do all sorts of things, give up their civil freedoms, invest huge amounts of money in all kinds of worthless projects. But without that fear, and people think rationally, they can't do it. So it's been our history throughout time that you create a menace and then you ask people to respond to that phony menace. And we had the phony menace of communism, we had the phony menace of the African Americans, particularly in the South. We had each group has been targeted over the years. The Japanese internment during World War II and so on. I could go down a whole long list of these kind of cases. But each time it was kept alive, I think primarily by the need to generate fear so that other people could take advantage of it.
If I could just add to that, I mean, in addition to the groups that Steve mentioned, I mean, there are various religious groups in this country in the course of American history who have dealt with not much higher levels of, if you want to call it persecution or discrimination as compared to Muslims. I mean, Mormons are born and bred from America. They come out of Utah, and there were extermination orders put out for Mormons. I mean, nothing like that have Muslims dealt with. And so, in relation to that, in relation to the plight of Catholics when they came to this country, I mean, you look at the allegations that were levied against the Catholics, the idea that their allegiances lie to the Pope, this foreign entity, and not to the U.S. government, sounds very familiar as to what we're hearing in relation to Muslims. And so I have a strong belief that if we continue to protect that principle that we've protected the entire time, which is this idea of free and vibrant expression of religion for everyone, and if we stick to our constitutional principles, then we will get over this hump as well.
One last point I would make on this question is that it's important to recognize that, and I think some of the polls that Professor Bagby pointed to earlier, and some of the scholarship that we see from the ISBU, it really shows that Islamophobia is not a majority opinion in the United States. In fact, it's a very small minority that simply has some very powerful friends. And in my opinion, and from the research that I've done, it seems that Islamophobia serves the interests of some of the powerful, and that it's used not because many folks that are involved with propagating Islamophobia, they personally may not want to oppress Muslims. It's that they want some other goal. They want more money from the military, for example, or they want additional funding for law enforcement. And they use Islamophobia as a wedge issue, as a way to promote fear, as Steve said, right? And I think it's important to recognize that, and therefore recognize that there is much that can be done by the people in this room. The enemy, the Islamophobia, the folks that are standing on the other side are powerful, yes, but they are not so powerful that we can't have an effect, that we can't confront them. And it has been done before. There are many successes. We've heard about some. Please, sister.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. I work within the field of interfaith, and I do thank you so much for bringing that up. That is key. There is so much in the wisdom in the Quran and the teachings of Muhammad May blessings and peace be upon him, that we need to follow. And he says to get to know one another. We cannot get to know one another if we stay to ourselves. We have to come out into the world. We have to be friendly with our neighbors. We have to open our doors. And to let you know that there's no need always to be discouraged with what's going on in the world that's negative. We have to focus on what we can do that is positive and bring Rahman and Rahim into the world by our own personal actions, by our own involvement with interfaith organizations. And I bring to you many wonderful things that are going on. And I invite everyone here to participate. There's a wonderful event that's happening this coming Sunday called 9/11 Unity Walk. You can look it up, 911unitywalk.org. You can even Google it on YouTube. And 2005 has the best documentary. This is the time to come out, to stay, walk together with people, with your neighbors of different religions. Let them get to know who you are as a person. There's a group called Jewish Islamic Dialogue Society. We went into a synagogue and we brought Muslims with us and showed a film and did a dialogue. Oh my gosh, when people left, they said, "Can we meet more Muslims? Where are they?" So everyone is ready, willing, and able if the Muslim community comes out and begins joining these activities. There is something called the UN Interfaith World Harmony Week. That's an excuse to get together with the churches, the synagogues, and temples in your neighborhood. It is time for the mosques to step forward, as some are doing in this country and around the world, to be leaders in interfaith and to show that we're opening our doors to invite you in to celebrate our holidays with us, with Ramadan and Iftar. So all of that is so very important. And to bring our youth, I see there were some children here, to have opportunities to bring our youth together. And if they're not out there, create them. That's what the Creator did. There's a Sufi story where this man complained, and he says, "Oh my God, Allah, what a horrible world this is. Why didn't you do something?" And he goes to sleep. He gets up in the morning, and the words come to him, "I did do something. I created you."
Thank you, sister. We're going to be distributing some blue cards where you can give feedback about the panel. Please take a moment and look at them. Let's get a few questions now and a few comments. If we could hear a few brief remarks. We only have a few minutes left, and then we'll ask the panelists to make one last contribution. Please, sister.
I had a question. I'm a journalism major, so I was curious if you think the Islamophobia you speak of, would you say it's more existent within the government, in society in general, or in the media? And what can those of us who are in the mass media, what can we do to change that?
Thank you for your question. I'm really happy to hear that you're in the field of journalism. I think that's an area that we need much more American Muslim activity in. I do think that each of those segments of the population that you mentioned have a role to play in the Islamophobia phenomenon that we're witnessing. So for instance, let's say with the media, oftentimes within the media we hear about American Muslims as terrorists, as violent extremists. We hardly hear stories as Muslims, as good citizens, and that's simply because there may not be as much interest. It's a much hotter issue to talk about the Muslim who was plotting to kill X number of people than to talk about the Muslim who's volunteering at the soup kitchen to feed X number of people. But I think that our job, if you are in the field of journalism, or if you're able to write, as I know Asma and I both write op-eds on a pretty regular basis, is to try and bring those stories to light, to humanize American Muslims. Because what occurs through media depictions is that you're perpetuating the stereotype of American Muslims as violent, as fundamentalists, as anti-American, as extremists, and that is the interaction that most Americans are having with the Muslim American community, because as we heard, the American Muslim community constitutes 1 to 2% of the total population. So what are the odds of your neighbors, of your co-workers, of other people actually interacting with Muslims? If they don't have a Muslim co-worker, or they don't have a Muslim in their public school, or their neighbor is not Muslim, then most of their information is coming from the media. And if that media portrayal is negative, then that's the characterization that sticks with them. So I do think that that's an important field that we need to be more active in. I think in terms of government, as I mentioned, the Islamophobia trainings definitely play a role. I think that when we hear about the profiling of mosques, I can't help but believe that that can then lead to opposition to mosque construction sites and expansion projects throughout the country, right? Because if you're an American and you have no other interaction with Muslims and you hear that the mosque is being built and you understand that government agents are infiltrating or trying to infiltrate mosques and that they suspect that terrorist activity is going on there, what are you thinking is happening at that mosque? So of course, many people are going to come out and oppose the mosques for that reason. So I think the government has this dual role that they play. In some ways, they come out and they protect our civil rights. For instance, with the Murfreesboro, Tennessee mosque construction, the Department of Justice actually filed a brief in the case saying Islam is a religion, Islam is not a cult, it deserves the protection of our laws. And so you hear about the Department of Justice coming out and representing our interests in employment discrimination cases, etc. But there are also negative stories, as you heard already earlier today. And I think our political officials really need to be held accountable. I haven't really had a chance to discuss that, but as the presidential election heats up, we're hearing more and more derogatory comments about Muslims. The RNC, the Republican National Convention, just recently adopted a platform, an anti-Sharia platform. That's now part of their political platform. President Obama is characterized as a Muslim to denigrate him. Muslim is an insult. And so these things are occurring, and we need to hold our political officials responsible. And for those of you who are paying attention, you know that there's a direct relationship between the vitriol that political officials spread and hate crimes and discrimination against Muslims. And if you question that, just look at what happened during Ramadan this year. We had a representative of Congress, Representative Walsh in Illinois, during the town hall meeting, make a discriminatory, biased, inflammatory remarks about Muslims living in our midst who want to kill us in Illinois. And there were a string of hate crimes that followed in Illinois with an acid bomb that was thrown against a mosque, etc. I think that there in 10 or 11 days, there were 7 hate crime incidents, all happening in Illinois, and that you can't help but know that it's related to the comments that people are making. The same thing is happening with presidential candidates like Herman Cain and others who publicly say without any recourse, nothing happens when they say this, which is, I'm not going to have a Muslim within my cabinet. So if you think that the discrimination or stigmatization only affects taxi cab driver or whatnot, it doesn't. It affects everybody, because the person who's qualified to serve in the cabinet is a very educated, intelligent, intellectual individual. And the message that's being sent out is that it's okay to discriminate against individuals merely because they're Muslims. Herman Cain can say that because he'll get away with it. He can't say that about Latinos. He can't say that about African Americans. He can't say that about other Jewish Americans, because there will be a consequence. And it's up to us for there to be a legal consequence. And that consequence, and I'll just close on this, is by at least voting. And it's sad that I have to say this, but let me tell you, in 2009, Gallup did a survey of American Muslims. One of the great things that came out of that poll is to show that of all the faith communities in America, American Muslims are the most tolerant faith community in America. Okay? That's wonderful. What it also showed is that we are also the least likely of all the faith communities to vote. We are the least likely to vote. That is where political power rests. It rests in being registered to vote, it rests in exercising your right to vote, it rests in making political contributions to candidates that serve your interests. If you're not using those powers, you are then leaving yourself vulnerable to these attacks. That is what we must do to empower ourselves. We need to be politically engaged. These are basic rights. And if you take them for granted, those of us who are here, because look at the Arab Spring, those people risked their lives. Some people died just for the sake of being able to vote. So, vote.
Very important. If there's anything that you can do when you get back there, and then there are many things, one thing you can do is register and vote and get others in your community registered and talk to them about voting as well. Please, we have just a few minutes left. Please be brief, and we'll try to hear from all 4 people who are at the microphone. Please, go ahead.
Can we just limit to questions here?
Please, if we could make this as brief as possible.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Jawadi, and I live in Virginia. I wanted to ask you guys if Institute for Social Policy and Understanding has provided a pamphlet or any kind of book of that about Sharia law. Because when I talk to, based on where I work, I come to a lot of people, contact with people who are not Muslims, and they say, okay, in Islam and the Islamic law and the Sharia law, if you steal something, they're going to cut your hand. If they can stone you, they can whip you in public. Basically, that's all they understand about Islam, the Islamic law, and I want to make it very brief. I want to see if you have any comments about those things.
Yes.
The second question.
We just have time for one question. I'm sorry, brother. Yes, and Farid, can I ask you, is there research at the ISP or elsewhere to counter this kind of misconception, these stereotypes?
We'll take the other questions, but yes, there is. On our website at ispu.org, there are papers on the subject. In fact, Asma has written on the issue of Sharia and anti-Sharia debate, but then we wrote recently a very specific paper on defining Sharia to make it easy and accessible for the public.
We have just a few minutes, please.
Thank you. I'm also with Interfaith Council in Richmond, Virginia, about Sikhism and International Day of Peace. And similar question about Facebook friends that post all this nasty stuff from the anti-jihad websites or something, and how to briefly counter their Facebook comments briefly, nicely, politely, without getting into a back and forth argument online.
Yeah, a really good question, and I encourage you once again, visit our website, ispu.org. There are lots of, you can point people to research. You don't have to simply say something. We have research showing that these things are true, that the misconceptions are, and it's easy to counter them. Please, brother.
This is a common kind of question too. One thing is that Muslims also over here are a victim of our own size and the diversity. We say we are 1.6 billion all over the world, but when anything happens somewhere else, we get affected over here. There is some Coptic Christian in Egypt or Christian in Pakistan. It's gradually affecting what we perceive over here. So just a comment. The other thing is that the Congress is the people in public life, the congressmen and stuff. Those are the most important people because they set the policies and they are the one who give the red meat to the press. And those people are just for money. I mean, the congressional races are multi-million-dollar, races now, billion-dollar races in the Senate. So, we over here, we can raise only $5,000 and the other got $1 billion. So who's going to go for it? So unless they have some morality, it's going to be, we will be in the shock.
Thank you, brother. Yeah, and being involved politically, as our panelists have said, very important in that regard. This will be our last question. Please briefly.
Assalamu alaikum. First of all, from what I heard from Steve, it's so sad that some people accuse Muslims of terrorist acts when they are doing the terrorist act itself. The second thing is that I live in upstate New York, and there are few masajid, and there is a lot of interfaith programs. Unfortunately, I see the same people attending it, and I could tell nationwide they could be 10-15% nationwide. The other percentage are highly ignorant about Islam, and I think that the institute that can clarify more about Islam is the media. We need to invite media. The message need to invite media and the centers and the conferences. I would like to see many people of the media, the nationwide media, CNN and all these Fox News, and educate them about Muslims, and hopefully we might see more change than the interfaith programs.
Thank you very much, sister. And I'm afraid we've run out of time. I want to thank all of our panelists, Ihsan Bagby, Engy Abdelkader, Asma Uddin, and Steve Downs for being here. I want to thank all of you for being here as well. Let's keep the conversation going about ways that we can confront Islamophobia. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to ISP as well.